Duolingo is another company whose stock has been really hurting recently, down almost 50% from the all-time highs. And if you clicked on this video, you probably know that because you're asking what my thoughts are on Duolingo. This is a company that I've invested in 3 times. So there's a bit of a relationship going on there. I made a video about them in August of 2024. They were way down at $160 a share. And even though now they're still trading at nearly double that, at 300, I actually think the shares are at very good risk reward, very good value today. 13 times forward sales. Okay, it doesn't sound that cheap until you realize that the growth is monstrous. They just reported 41% in the last quarter. The median analysts estimate for full year annualized revenue growth is 36. And that's $1 billion in annual revenue as well. So to grow 36% up to $1 billion, that's huge. In fact, there are only 15 public companies in America with a market cap larger than Duolingo, which is 13.8 billion, growing at least 30%. So there's only 15 companies larger than Duolingo growing at least 30%. And only 3 of those have a forward price to free cash flow lower than Duolingo, one of those being my darling Mercado Libre, which is, it remains one of my largest holdings and has been for some time. Very good, sleep well at night stock, in my opinion. So Duolingo's price to free cash flow, because I mentioned there's only a few companies that have it lower than that, their forward price to free cash flow is 35. So 13 times forward sales, 35 times forward price to free cash flow. That sounds pretty good. You're getting a lot of money going to the bottom line of the cash flow statement for a company growing 36%. This comes back to Duolingo's, one of their key advantages, because I was looking at that and I was like, okay, doesn't seem so cheap on the top line still. And if you look at the graph, it's cheaper compared to historic on price to sales, but actually looking much better compared to historic when you look at forward price to free cash flow. Obviously, what does that mean? That's a product of their margins expanding significantly. However, the reason why this conversion from revenue to free cash flow is so mighty, you look at their sales and marketing and it's just 11.5% of revenue, right? And I'm covering a lot of fast growing SaaS. I know Duolingo is more of a platform as a service, but a lot of the companies with these kind of market caps growing at these sort of rates, they're spending almost half of their revenue on sales and marketing in some cases. HIM's obviously a platform as a service, infamous for spending half of its revenue, or sometimes even more than that, just a couple of years ago, more than half of its revenue on sales and marketing. Duolingo's sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue is just 11.5%. What does that allow them to do? That allows them to continue to spend roughly the industry standard of 30% of their revenue on R&D, continuously improve their platform, and still retain 35% free cash flow margins. And in fact, on the forward, it's 39%. They're forecasting 39% free cash flow margins forward, which is nuts. So you're actually looking at on a bottom line basis, and despite quite a lofty sales valuation, you look at growth, and then growth in free cash flows even more because those margins are expanding. That's how you're getting to 35 times forward, and what I think is a reasonable valuation. And it just goes to show the fact that Duolingo can grow at these rates with just 11.5% of their revenue spent on sales and marketing. And bear in mind, their revenue, at least forecasted for this year, is going to be about $1 billion. So they're only spending roughly 100 million a year on sales and marketing. And it goes to show, right? Their owl is famous. And I think if you asked people on the street, 90% of people on the street would probably be able to tell you the color of the Duolingo owl. I remember it had a little spot in the Barbie movie, which I think would have been the top grossing movie of 2023, maybe the second top grossing movie, but Duolingo is everywhere, right? That sound, the way that people associate that sound is like a nostalgia associated with Duolingo. So their brand is incredibly strong. And that's very, very important because it allows Duolingo to have these incredibly high margins, which is obviously great. Everyone loves a business generating a ton of free cash flow, actually proving they can do it. However, it allows them to have this higher R&D number. And remember, of course, the market may punish it, but the fact they've got 39% forward free cash flow margins, it gives them that wriggle room to aggressively go after that R&D. I also wanted to mention that Duolingo's daily active users versus payers, so their payers as a percentage of daily active users is still quite low, suggesting they don't need to spend much on sales and marketing because they've got so many people on the platform, and they're just trying to convert those to paid users, which they are also doing very well at. I haven't got those numbers in front of me, but their conversion is getting better. And the other thing to consider is they've got an advertising business which is small but still growing at a massive clip, right? If you've got 129 million monthly active eyeballs right there, and you're not monetizing them through paid subscription, absolutely fair enough. Other people are happy to watch an advert in order to stay on the free model. So really, really good economics there. And this comes down to the crux of it, right? So Duolingo have got that 300 million a year or so that they're spending on R&D. And the main argument, as you've seen in the thumbnail of the video, is are Duolingo going to be destroyed by ChatGPT or whichever large language model you choose? And on the surface, I think this argument has a bit of merit, right? Because technically, yeah, you can pay 20 quid a month for the premium version of a large language model and type ciao or dobry den or whatever language you're learning into this model, and you can talk to it. And then you get everything bundled in. You get all of your information on a big generalized trained AI instead of Duolingo, which I think is a bit cheaper than that. It's cheaper than £20 a month, certainly. But it's not a tiny cost, right? People are still paying, I think, at least $5 a month for this app. However, in practice, you've got to think, are people really doing that? And that comes to the crux of what Duolingo are actually really accomplishing, is that they are obsessed with gamifying and optimizing user engagement and enjoyment of learning. And obviously ChatGPT is very, very far from it. There are language textbooks that are more exciting than ChatGPT. Yes, ChatGPT and other large language models are very practical, very good at information scraping, and incredibly smart at what they do. They're revolutionary tools. However, for, let's say, continue graft and grit, actually trying to grasp learning a new language, they are not fantastic. They are generalized models, right? And this is the point, is that yes, of course, whilst ChatGPT and other large language models may possess the most powerful generalized AI, right? Obviously Anthropic is backed by Amazon, OpenAI is backed by Microsoft, Google's model is from the ground up. Everyone has a very smart backer that has access to extremely powerful AI, right? The hyperscalers. What Duolingo have is they have the data advantage on how people are learning, right? On what makes somebody stick on the app, what makes somebody want to learn more. And that's the real unique data that these large language models that, oh yeah, inherently they could just kill Duolingo's business model, don't have. And Duolingo can utilize this data to work out, to optimize the sound when you do something correctly, or the color of the token that you obtain when you finished a level. These are the sorts of things that Duolingo are optimizing for. Your avatar, you know, who's talking to you? Is it a human or a bear that's like speaking to you? And I know that sounds silly, but all of these things add up for retention. And that's the unique data that Duolingo possess. And with 128 million, I said 129 earlier, I've just got 128 million written down. That's a huge amount of people. There are not 128 monthly active users going on to large language models consistently. And even if there were, the only feedback that they're getting is, oh, how much longer are they on here because they're typing on text. And there's not really any feedback or new things that that ChatGPT or large language model could try out relative to Duolingo. You know, you go onto Duolingo today and they have audio exercises, they have matching the pair exercises, they have different text exercises, putting someone against a friend who's learning the same language. Duolingo have all of this unique data to constantly test and then re-optimize their app in order to drive retention up and up and up, keep people learning, keep their subscription going. Because that's the thing, is that if they're a paid user, you want to keep their subscription going. If they're a free user, you want their retention to be longer so that in between lessons you can show them more advertisements. What's also interesting that a lot of people haven't talked about with Duolingo, and I love their management, by the way, I won't talk about that too much, but I obviously listen to a huge amount of earnings calls when I do this work, and Duolingo, without a shadow of a doubt, is in the top 5 earnings calls I have the pleasure of listening to. I haven't listened to every one, but I've probably listened to about 5 over the last 3 years because I've been in and out as a shareholder, and it is one of those earnings calls that, you know, I can be sleep deprived and I will hop on the Duolingo earnings call and I will be massively energized after the earnings call. I don't miss a beat. And there's just something about the cohesive energy of the members of the board that are on the call that really stands out to me. They love their jobs. They all love their jobs. And that's really, really important. I did have a quick look on sites like Comparably and Glassdoor as well. And Duolingo's CEO scores and culture is actually massively above a lot of companies in a similar sort of range to them. But one thing that's interesting is Louis Van Arm, his previous stint was in tech, and he founded Recapture, which was later sold to Google just 2 years later, which is a success in itself. So when a website's trying to verify that you're human, you have to go through this little test, and it's like, okay, you're verified. You can go onto the website now, you're not a bot. But what's interesting about Recapture is that purpose was actually to train computers to recognize hard to read text or hard to see images. And that's actually interesting because what is that? That's basically training an AI model. So I know with Duolingo it's an incredibly different thing, and it's all about customer behavior, and it's much more different than that's a fire hydrant, that's not a fire hydrant, right? Duolingo is much more complex than that. But it does show that the CEO of Duolingo, who's also the founder, right, had prior experience from 2007 to 2009 understanding this kind of training technology, and that's deeply embedded within Duolingo. So that actually gives me a lot of confidence that when Duolingo discuss something like artificial intelligence, they are not just using it as a buzzword because ChatGPT's come out and they're terrified that ChatGPT is going to destroy their business. And also, by the way, since ChatGPT has come out, in 2022, they grew 47%. In 2023, they grew 44%. This is all revenue. Last year, they grew 41%. Last quarter, they grew 41%. Again, the analysts are forecasting 36. Duolingo, they may beat. They may grow 37 or 38. So for a company that's already operating in the hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, that rate of revenue growth is not slowing down that much. So that's evident that ChatGPT is not destroying them. But I just think it's interesting that Louis Van Arm actually has this background because it's showing very early on he understands, at least to some degree, how machine learning works and how AI models worked. And he wasn't just solely a language professor that thought, right, let's reinvent education. And that's another point out there, is that education, you know, I think I made this point in my 2024 video, is that yes, I understand why some people make that argument that Duolingo is getting disrupted. But are Duolingo disrupted, or are they the disruptors? Because education is a huge, huge legacy market. And we're not just talking about languages anymore, because Duolingo have launched math and music, and now they've launched chess. And from what they said recently, chess has been one of their fastest growing segments that has attracted a lot of people. I'm a chess player, and I know that the level of interest in chess has taken off massively, especially since the pandemic, and that was a really good move on their part. But my point is that now this is segueing from a language app to an education app, right? And the total addressable market of education is huge. So are they the disruptors? I think they are. Like, I think that they're not being disrupted by AI. I think that's just enhancing their platform and helping them increase education outcomes. However, look at the education system. Look at the industry as a whole. It historically lags, right? And we can all talk about the reasons for that in innovation. The main reason, or one of the main reasons, that there are still so many Office Depots or WH Smiths, if you're from the UK, on the high street is solely because of the education industry. But isn't that a bit of a contradiction when some of the most tech-savvy humans on the planet are children? And they're going to be working in a technological environment that's even greater than the same environment that I'm working in today, because technology's got to advance further. And it's just a shame that there's a disconnect, so much of a disconnect between children go to school and they're writing on pen and paper all day, and they're coming home and spending so much time on their smartphones. And I think this is where Duolingo really have a big opportunity, a massive opportunity. Obviously, they have completely transformed language learning. Language learning was a ball ache at my school, and it was for most people. Like, you know, you go through a textbook and you're talking about conjugated verbs, and it doesn't make any sense. But it's a shame, because it doesn't have to be that way. People learn language because they want to understand different cultures, communicate with friends they've made from all over the world. They want to travel, right? That's a massive thing for millennials and Gen Z. Everyone's traveling more than ever. And you know, the status quo in schools is slow to change, as I said, and there's a big mismatch from that. And I think that this is another point where Duolingo have a massive opportunity, is that how are we going to get kids in a fast, instantaneous world? Because that's another problem with learning, is that we're all exposed to so much instant gratification these days. In that fast, instant gratification world, how are we going to sit down with kids and teach them a language textbook? And as I said, this is not exclusively about languages anymore. Duolingo are broadening their horizons in the education market. They literally they have the distribution already, and they have the data, and they are constantly iterating on an app, on a device, the smartphone, which grabs children's attention like no other, and certainly grabs teenagers' attention. I'm not saying all of education should be like that, but I think it's just interesting that Duolingo are changing this to a point where they help people to learn, and they can help people to learn and completely optimize it, instead of a textbook just guessing, what should we have in here? You know, what can we actually do? Oh, I don't know what the children want. Let's ask a survey, whatever. Duolingo literally have that data. How long did someone stay on the app? Okay, after this exercise, X minus 5% fewer people stayed on the app than this exercise. We need to do less of this exercise here. Boom, 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 boom. When the person wakes up first thing in the morning and they do Duolingo, they're typically somebody whose brain needs to get going. So we want to start them off with an easier exercise when they wake up first thing in the morning. This is the kind of thing that Duolingo can do. And then again, it comes back down to the management team when you really think, okay, do they have the ability to actually utilize this unique data set they've got in order to drive this powerful AI learning machine? And I think they do. And then it comes back to that point, okay, 13 times forward sales, okay, yeah, it sounds expensive in isolation, but 35 times forward price to free cash flow on a company that's growing their top line 40% a year, continuously optimizing their margins, proving now that their marketing is so globally recognized. So they've got such distribution that they only need to spend 10% of their revenue on sales and marketing. They can spend 30% on R&D, still have 40% free cash flow margins, up their R&D if they need to, and expand. And this company, they're just in a prime position now to be a compounding machine if they can continue to execute on what they do. And as I said, people can make the ChatGPT argument, but at least for now, it's not showing up in the numbers. They're one of the fastest companies growing, and to be growing, I mean, just to be growing at 41% when your annualized revenues are nearly $1 billion a year, that's extremely impressive. So that's why I'm interested in Duolingo right now. I think the sell-off is massively overblown, and yeah, hop on one of the earnings calls. They are really, really, really enjoyable to watch, and that's what you want. You want to feel good energy, good positive energy from a company when you finish off. Like, they're very, very passionate about the mission, and I'm very excited to see where this company goes in the future.